Okay, here we are of a very chilly New Hampshire winter day. Maybe that's why I just forgot to put my mic on. I hope I don't do this wrong, Mr. Producer. Put my mic on and had it. So I'm now in the process of doing take number two. Not that you would know. Meantime, what is warming our hearts here is these beautiful contributions that are coming in nowadays. John J., Ben C., Angela M., who says, "Thank you for so generously sharing your knowledge and wisdom with both humility and humor." Well, I certainly laugh at a lot of things, but I think I just keep remembering this friend at the State House when I was a representative. He said, "I have a great deal to be humble about." As his response to somebody saying he was humble. Sonia D, I'm sorry, Jimmy C, Adam C, and Stephen J. And Stephen, I do hope you're feeling well these days. I'm very blessed to you. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This is excellent. As I said, that warms the cockles of my heart and puts some food on the table for the Mr. Producer who has to do all the work. I'm just here having fun, by the way, and don't you think? It is the joy of my life. I mean, not doing videos, although I enjoy the conversation. I had the strange experience of yesterday and speaking in a church setting and talking about things as they relate to faith, So what I'm doing this time is I'm just sharing your comments. We're continuing the discussion. And the discussion of AI. And one of you, somewhere along the way in here, asked, I should have played that one first probably, or set that one up first, but all I'm doing is I'm going to show your comments, and then I'm just going to chat a little bit about each one of them as it comes to me to do so. And but let me just say that this is based on the comments you'll see under video 430, at least up till today. What is today, the 21st? The day after the inauguration of a new American president. One of those things, if you're not from this country, who knows what it means to you, but it's a big deal for us, those sorts of things. Nick N. says, I've had this philosophy since the early 90s when I began atelier studies. That is, man moved more into digital tech. Those who create with their hands will be heralded above all others. And we all want to be heralded, don't we? Kidding. I chose the road less traveled and still do. I'm thinking most of the people listening in the sound of my voice, as they say, if you're on the radio, have chosen the road less traveled. We're not talking to techies mostly, or engineers and people like that. Though I love, the cross-pollination of all sorts of expertises. I would even, find it useful, to not have all the information we're talking about here coming through us who are, just making maybe a little use out of AI, and it'd be fun to have somebody in the field talking about what can be done. If anybody knows of anyone like that, so simply that's what they do for a living. They are involved as AI engineers or however that works. But it'd be fun to have a conversation about what they're truly capable of, what a robot or whatever that world is, what the artificial intelligence world is really capable of. And we'd probably have fewer maybe disputes among ourselves as painters. Not that I expect disputes here, they're just interesting conversations. Christopher D. says, I'm honored to see my remarks discussed. Guys, we honor each other in this conversation because we are all people with brains and experiences, and there's a need to cross-pollinate, to carry on conversations with each other, to cross, some people say cross swords, but that's a kind of a conversation that's a sort of an attitude toward conversation that isn't a bad one. I mean, we disagree, but it's all about the conflict, that produces truth, the conflict of ideas. So all good stuff. Just a brief addition. The mentioned Roman Renaissance concept has its origin in literature. Yes, he was talking about these three, what he mentioned these three, yeah. translatio was seen as the rather slavish copying of a text. And by the way, that is a thing I've read that writers in maybe high school level, or I don't know what other levels, what have you do. I think I read it old educational practices, even in this country, say 1700s, that you would be expected to write out, to copy some significant passage out of a book or something like that by so and so, and for the same reason as you would copy a drawing by Raphael. Same reason. I mean, for the same to be able to gain whatever is to be gained by that experience, but literally writing their words down after the other, having to get the sentences right and all that sort of thing, noticing the punctuation, whatever. So translatio has a thing, whether it's the rather slavish copying of text, it may have a value in a time when you don't have a printing press too, right? Slavish copying, make it exactly right, so that you can share it with somebody. So, by the way, I'm not trying to challenge what you're saying. I understand you're talking about three different things. Translatio was the rather slavish copying of text. The imitatio would have been writing in the style of someone. So that's where I don't fancy the idea of you being a Boston School, a Hudson River, a Monet, being a little sergeant. That whole thing. That I find truly bothersome. That area where you're writing in the style of somebody else. It's sort of an amusing thing to do. I mean, when I couldn't even begin to write any poetry, I could still write a poem based on, like Mad Magazine would do this. Mad Magazine, if anybody knows that, they would from time to time have a poem, and one of them was based on John Masefield's I must go down to the sea again, to the lonely sea and sky, and all I want is a tall ship and a star to steer by. And the Mad Magazine did, I must go down to the garbage dump, to the lonely garbage dump, and all I want is a dump truck, and with a steering wheel on it or something. I don't know, but but that sort of thing everybody can do. That's not difficult to do. Just follow the meter, the rhythm, kind of a formula, right? And so that's the second type he's talking about. So the imitation is copying literal. The translation, the imitatio would be writing the style of, and then emulatio as surpassing the original authors. So now I would say, if you want to put three things to it, I would say that last one would be, so you're borrowing from the masters, but nature is your focus, right? So you're really writing with your original voice. But you're not unaware of the very nature of our form as informed by great masters, right? By other authors or other painters. So he says, I understood there could be some debate if this is 100% applicable to the graphic arts, because there it could maybe be interpreted as a problem of verisimilitude versus style. A grand debate, probably. By the way, anybody who wants to have further conversations on a question going in that direction, or if you do, Christopher D., bring them on, send them in. By the way, you guys can, if you're trying to not have me somehow lose it, which sometimes I don't see what's under your comments under these things. I try to, but I know that I've missed a couple in the last, say, 6 or 7 times. So if I don't see them, if you don't see me responding, it means I probably haven't seen it. By the way, I think it should show up on your emails if you're a subscriber, because I do try to comment briefly, at least minimally. If anybody wants to talk about anything, you can go to send it to me personally at Ingbretson_studio at yahoo.com. But if I understand correctly, this is what Stebbins meant by seeing reality, I suppose, through the prism of the personality. Regarding emulatio as surpassing, by the way, I see a paradox in this way in AI, because how can the program surpass itself in excellence? How can it judge the quality of what it's produced? And in this way, I see a relationship with the thought experiment of John Searle. But please correct me if I see this wrong. You're going to have to actually add some quotes from someone like Searle if you want me to respond to that. I just don't have time all the time to dig into those as much as I would like to. And I think I did see something by this guy Searle, but it's been a while. So I'm sort of hard pressed there. But, but where's the idea of surpassing the original authors? We're always in that camp of trying to do in a sense, it's not a competition, but we're trying to use what they have, but go beyond, right? It's just in the very nature of man to go beyond, but to go to the more pure thing, to the more there's a very fascinating thing that happens in this world of teleology, if we mentioned that before. But that idea of ends, and so what's happening is we're getting closer and closer to the very nature of this form. The more we do that thing, surpassing your master. How do you surpass somebody? How do you surpass them? You have to be capable of grasping what they've done and doing something that contains all that and even more or even better, et cetera, et cetera. So we live in a very interesting world. And by the way, it begins to answer a lot of this stuff about AI because it's not about AI, it's about us doing that. We surpass. And we don't surpass it by way of some devices, right? We surpass it in our whole grasp of the intellectual structure and the mechanics with our hands. So we're in a fascinating little world here, conversation here. Sean F., one of two comments, he says, I'm not sure if I agree that we see through the prism of a personality part. For me, it feels like we all see the same thing, or photorealistic art would not be a thing. That's an interesting question. We all see the same thing. In some sense, we do all see the same thing, but painters are not painting. Our job isn't photographic. As much as we talk about the truth, it's not. Any more than a fiction writer's job is photographic. A fiction writer is not a journalist, right? You're not writing to tell somebody exactly what happened. You're writing to tell somebody what your experience was with that before you, when you saw that with your eyes. So your interpretation of a portrait sitter is intended to be a conversation about the sitter. Doesn't mean you're going to distort or anything like that. You're going to use only the data in front of you. But there is an element of, if you want to call it that, just interpretation that's essential to it. So through the prism of a personality indicates this idea of interpretation. But it doesn't mean we just do stuff to people and just make up something. It's definitely something you pick up in the sense of in sensing who that person is. And all of a sudden when you're painting, or I shouldn't say all of a sudden, but as you're painting, certain elements of it lend themselves, and a part of you gloms on to those things that lend themselves to the nature of the sitter, to that. And I say the nature of the sitter, but I mean to what you see in the sitter, right? So very personal, not photographic in that limited sense. You could look at everybody's photograph and you look at them and you think, yeah, now one of those people is interesting. Well, yeah, why not? They're just photographs of another pile of people. There are piles of people everywhere, lots of photographs. What is it that painters do that it doesn't just become that, right? But that's the modern, sort of a lot of the new realism seems to have that as its goal, to just simply do more literalism than anybody else. And in some sense, that is one of the ambitions, and maybe one of the necessary ambitions of a representational painter. But even the Boston School, making as like as you can and then make it more like, or that's not even Boston School, by the way, that's actually Bonnat, an academic. He's talking about you just making a truthful drawing, make it as like as you can and then make it even more like, But in an impressionist painting, you're actually doing the same thing. You're making it more and more like, but it doesn't mean it's by way of details. It's more and more like that which you responded to in nature. It's a world that a lot of people want to say just leaves you Liberty Hall. You can just say whatever you want and say that that's what it meant to you and all that. Well, there is that risk in that way, right? And when people say they're filled with the Holy Spirit, you can say, well, the Holy Spirit or God or somebody told me to do this. You can say that all day. It doesn't mean it's true. If you can relate to that. I often do these tight paintings for commissions, often too tight for my liking. I find the best thing for me is to paint one just for me, all loosey-goosey. And then the rest of the paintings improve. Then too tight, then time to get loose again. It's a wonderful cycle to explore. I won't dispute that that's an amusing thing for a student to explore. One can do something like that. You wouldn't want to be loosey-goosey in the sense of just, I'd say screwing around, but it's a goofy kind of word. By the way, I don't mean, people need to have played with color and have played with possibilities of et cetera, So I'm not saying don't play. But it concerns me that when people talk about what do you mean when you talk about tight, if you have the concept that this is going to be acceptable when I finally noodle up every little facet on an earring when in fact it doesn't show a shine, it doesn't glow. What was that? Et cetera, et cetera. So there's a kind of a world between the visual impression thing and the idea of painting objects more and more literally that has to be grasped, has to be part of our conversation as we go along. One thing I did in the previous version of this thing, I took almost an hour to do it, and I need to speed it up. So I don't want to talk fast and I don't want to skip things, but I need to keep moving and not get on too many tangents. All these tangents have value, though, and you probably have your own tangents as you're listening. One Winter Leaf, who was one of our earlier conversations, who was the author of some of our earlier conversations. I think there were dashes between, or something between One Winter and Winter and Leaf. The AI discussion has been raging in digital art spaces. Many people, me included, have had to ask deeper questions to ourselves. What's even the point when a machine can create a more beautiful image in minimal time? I think I just like to spend the time painting. I like that. I think I just like to spend the time painting. Thinking of how to solve visual problems. Now do we not get pleasure from that? Solving problems. I mean, it's a really serious, but not that you couldn't possibly, I mean, in AI, certainly there's going to be problems to solve. How do you even work with AI? That's going to be a problem. But so I'm sure there's problem solving, but this person is talking about, I like to spend the time painting. That's with a stick in your hand and the feel of the paint coming off the brush against that texture canvas. These kinds of things, that's like breathing. It's like that thing that happens when you're playing a ball game and you're running up and down the floor. You're totally exhausted, but somehow or other, you know you can make it through. And this new way of breathing is suddenly yours. And you're doing things you couldn't have otherwise done. You're living in a different space. Somehow we value that. But the idea of touch, it's a huge thing. You don't get touch. What is touch? And what are all these things we're doing? With that whole discussion that has to do with why we're valued. What is all that stuff we're doing? Is that touch of a brush within our hand, the way the mark was made? Does that convey things to the viewer? One of the reasons reasons we're in this world, I think, is because of the internet, where it just looks like a painting, but only because you have the idea it's a painting. It's not a painting. It's a photographic thing with light coming through it, and you can't see any of the marks. It's not a painting. You can't see the canvas. You can't feel it. There's nothing about this world. I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find a photograph that even begins to convey a painting. But a painting is something that hangs on somebody's wall. And when you get there, then seeing the touch, the ways the marks were made, the kind of palette that person was using. Do you see what I mean? You begin to get to this place where you start suddenly, maybe in the same way as the way we value unfinished works, you begin to get in that place where you begin to appreciate the struggle. It reminds me a little bit of that. What I tell you about that as I was a 5-year-old, looking at the unfinished Smithsonian portrait of George Washington, looking from the finished sort of nose area to this rubbed off paint. Now what is it about that? And I'm with you when this whole thing about you're looking at things, spending the time in painting, thinking how to solve visual problems, going through processes where an image emerges from a blank canvas bit by bit. That's what I saw. There's this 5-year-old. I saw that and it fascinated me. It could be the reason I became a painter. I won't say it isn't. Thank you, Paul. The Offered Sevens quote's very good. This from Ben C. I, like you, am not interested in AI's perspective. I don't care what AI thinks. And I know AI's personality, if such a thing exists. Yeah. It's just like, that you're saying it so clearly and insightfully here that I don't know if more really needs to be said. I mean, like, doesn't that sort of sum it up? I'm just not interested in what AI thinks. Why AI? So a lot of times I think what we're trying to do is what I think C.S. Lewis called cheap grace. We're trying to get something for nothing. And there's something about you and your respect for a painter or even a musician. There's something about that only comes through the knowledge of the struggle, the 5 hours of practicing on that violin every single how many hundreds of hours, in a month or a year or whatever, how many, that whole discussion of 10,000 hours of well-directed practice. I mean, isn't that half of the significance of what we're dealing with here? It's about helping us to engage and being those kinds of persons, to be better in ourselves. There's a world, I mean, it's part of the world of the intelligence, that the intellect starts taking over and thinking that it somehow or other it can replace. I can do that better. Oh, I can do that better. I can do that better. But in fact, you can't do it at all because you haven't put the time in and you don't have the soul for it. It's just an interesting question whether engineers, for example, are going to be as good as people who just like using their fingers. What's the difference in those minds, and what's the value difference? Just fascinating. It just brings up, doesn't it bring up just sort of crazy, fascinating questions? Sean F. again says, great discussion. I figure using AI to thumbnail different compositions could be a time saver. And I've said to you before that I've done that. I've used, not AI, but I've used something like Photoshop, Draw Program or something like that in OpenOffice. And I just, the photograph is there and I just make a mark with a digitally make a mark, take one thing out and put something else in, cover one spot with white, or whatever value to move it, and then move it over to a different place. And or you can blow up its size. You can actually see something. You can see the varieties of possibilities of placement. And going through those permutations, trial and error wise, you can get closer to what your vision is for a thing. And the faster you can do it, I can't say that I have any problem with that use of, but I've just say of technology. But that's in a whole different use. And I do think it's one of the better uses, if you're going to make of it, is in composition, if you're going to make uses of these things. But on the other hand, if you don't understand composition, you could be doing this all day long and doing varieties of things, and I'm thinking you won't get any further than you would have. It's the knowledge, it's in your own soul, that's the key thing. How are you going to judge whether AI is even doing any good? You don't have knowledge. But if you do have knowledge, I'm going to suggest to you that there are various kinds of things like that, what I just described. And, they're sort of in the class of tracing paper and those sorts of things. I can see that you might want to come up with some prompts and then use an AI image as a reference. Well, in that sense, a reference, trial and error is all like that, so that to the extent that it's doing your thinking for you. I was going to say that I was just working on something, trying to sort out what I would do if I had a Last Judgment. I mean, not Last Judgment, I apologize, Last Supper to paint. And within 5 very little scribbles with charcoal, maybe soft pencil, I had gone through enough permutations to have found the one, right? To have found the one that I said, no, there it is. I didn't need a computer to do that. And that was the essence of what the composition would be. So I don't know. I'm still, not sure what to make of it. I would be worried a little bit about the influences that are going to come out of it. Like I've said, cultural influences abound. Do you live in the city? There's going to be cultural influences. If you live at the foot of a mountain, there's going to be different influences that will feed into your, to your whole makeup and influence you. I'd worry that some AI image that got generated and all of a sudden you'd just start thinking, oh, I'll do that. Yeah, I'll do that. And before you know it, AI is just taking you down some primrose path. Now, not that in one sense it really can take you down a primrose path if you're using good judgment. I mean, in some theories. So if that were the case and you were using good judgment and actually were a trained painter, there's a much more serious chance that you could use it without being abused by it. One of the problems with models, even in painting, when you stand up a model in front of you, if you're trying to do an imaginative painting and you already have the figure determined, if you haven't seen it, the book by Alfred, I want to say Boehm, on Academy in French painting or something like that, or what's it called? Maybe it's Painting in the French Academy. I don't know. The word Academy, I believe, features into this Boehm book. But in any case, he's talking about how these people, when the students were doing the pre-Rome stuff, they would have these very interesting and lively compositions, and they'd bring models in and just kill them. they just became slaves of the model. So, it's sort of in that direction that you have to be always watchful. And imaginative work is, it needs to maintain your job with imaginative work. Impressionism is one thing, but and your job is to maintain the unity of the visual impression in front of you. With imaginative work, you have this need to maintain the unity of the concept, of what you're saying, what you're trying to get across. So the model, you can come in, we had at one point, I had some students working on a project of their own, but it was imaginative. And the model they were using was exquisite for the job, and they hadn't finished the drawings, and she quit. And that we could not find another model that even began to be as exquisitely suggestive of what was a river idea, a very fluid figure. All the models that came in beyond that were just sort of normal people. They lacked this thing that even inspired that subject. So, but even then, with that model, you wouldn't just copy it like a photograph, would you? You'd have in mind your idea. That's the imaginative. Now, when you're an impressionist painter, that's not your job. Your job isn't to make up stuff. Your job is to explore, right, and to bring forth that the magic of the day, and convey that effectively to the viewer, as Monet does so often. I don't think coming up with prompts counts as you creating art, though. Sean says, and I would agree with that. Yeah. That's why it's the engineers that might be just as well off doing it as you. Alan V says, I think there are pros and cons to AI. What are some of the benefits? Take someone who can't leave their house, for example, someone who can't get out and paint. So we're supposed to paint what we see. So are you that guy, Alan V? We're supposed to paint what we see. I think I touched on that just for a second, though. That idea of our, if you don't live where you can paint a landscape, what are you supposed to do? I'm a fan of the idea, by the way, in that setting, that you paint what's in front of you, and find the beauty that's in front of you. Find it there. There's a guy, Jamie was a guy who ran the cable access thing up in Lyndonville, Vermont, where we did a cable access program way back when. And he would take his, I think they were photography students, or maybe they're videography students, and he would tell them they had to do a video, but they couldn't leave. They had to do it within 100 feet of the building, of the college buildings. And it was amazing. It's an amazingly poignant thing. Even Alfred Stebbins says the landscape painter needs to paint the world he's in, the world he's from. Not some other. He doesn't want you to paint the fantasy world because of his mindset. He wants you to actually talk about something you know deeply. And so much fiction does come out of who you are, right, and what you actually experienced. But somewhat likewise in painting, right? So there's that, right? But then he says, I'm to the point where I like to paint what I see and what I want to see. Now that's an interesting idea. There's nothing wrong with fantasy, as it were, fantasy painting. I don't have a problem with that. I just want guys to have done the proper training so that they could hit notes and and make shapes accurately, and articulate form and all that sort of stuff, and be good at painting what they see. I think that's a crucial thing before you start wandering into these worlds. But if you want to be thoroughly effective as a painter, there's that credibility thing about looking plausibly like. That's that, if you want to call it that truth element. Even in fantasy work, and I'm talking about fantasy in fiction now, there's got to be something that's plausible about it, right? So that's its own world, though, and I'm not trying to get into that. I want to keep reminding you that I'm talking about the world I primarily know, which is the world of the Impressionist. And I'm trying to convey information about how we think in this world, the Boston School way kind of mindset. So I've done... and some of the research on it appears that Midjourney has a little mind of its own. It wants to create things that it wants to see and not just what it's learned. Yeah, again, that's what I would tell you is in the nature of the imaginative and the imagined. It's all perfectly fair game for painters. I'm not taking anything away from anybody. So does this help us to encourage seeing things that we may want to see? Yeah. So that's a question, for example, if you just said, with a computer, I can just push a button, the sky's green now instead of blue. Well, if you're trying to convey a certain phantasmagorical mood or something like that, I would think you would want that in some sense. But on the other hand, and if it's time saving, you might begin to say, oh, that could be, Now the people like Poussin were always setting up their little dioramas, so they would be trying to create the color scheme like you would with a still life, right in front of them, presumably, right? And then you'd still have to have the skills of being a painter and rendering what you see in front of you on some level or other. But does this help us to encourage seeing things that we want to see? Does AI help? So I'm with you that there's something about that you do wonder about the benefit of. And I'm talking about, for example, just if you just change this whole thing I've seen my Mr. Producer take a film he's working on and change the entire thing to sepia. And it's ridiculous how it affects the mood of the whole thing. It's still got color, but you've seen that happen. A lot of people have done it in the last few generations, and last generation or so. But there's a very definite effect on the mood, the sense of time, and the sense of distance from our reality, and getting you into a different reality. There's no question about that. And maybe movies and all that stuff is where this is. AI primarily comes from. As I said, it's tough for me to watch movies that have all this technological people jumping over buildings and stuff like that. It just doesn't. There's this plausibility factor that just takes a little bit of the life out of it for me. And I don't know. You could say easily that's just me, Paul. It's just you. A lot of people really. My wife really likes that. She writes fantasy. So there may be a benefit of the AI platform. Either way, take it or leave it. It's not going anywhere. It's not going away, is what you're saying, right? Thank you, Paul, for the video, and I hope the conversation continues. Thank you, Alan V, for the comments. No, it's not going anywhere. But the question is our form going anywhere? And so one of the things I'm trying to get people to do constantly is to just keep on trying to sort out what is the very nature of this form. And even knowing stuff about AI helps it really puts you in a place of having to figure out the nature of the thing that you really are there for. Is that, and what's been done throughout history does AI turn that into something else, something it's not? Or are we living in a world where as day to day, it's becoming more what it is? We'll talk about that, hopefully, maybe. I wonder if AI would do half as much of the swearing and cursing that I do when I'm trying to produce a piece of art. Not for the faint of heart. I do like that handle you have. That struggle to produce, that thing about finding it and all that sort of stuff. It's part of the human fabric. It's so fascinating. I'd like to say something witty about that. You always wonder. I was mentioning cheap grace. You always wonder about what exactly the benefit is of suffering, so to speak. Why was he out there crying in the woods? He could have just turned his computer on. Whoa. Yeah, I love you. Very amusing. A gentle counterpoint, using the Bowie example. It's true that the engineer, this is from Ragurex, and I think I haven't heard from you before, so with a name like that, I'd remember, I think. It's true that the engineer producer could smooth over his performance. The question is, would he or she when he or she presented with the resulting performance? The producer could also have asked that Bowie do a retake and try to hold himself together. And by the way, retakes are somehow related to a lot of that. There's maybe a limit to how much, you want to see struggles. One of the things you don't, even in painting, you want it to look like it was easy on some level. You don't want people to feel like it's, oh man, the guy was sweating and I almost blew it. You don't really want to feel it, even though Terbolt says he doesn't trust a painting where he can't see where the painter went a little wrong. But Bowie himself could refuse and insist on using that original performance. We all have choices, and the existence of the technology doesn't automatically assume the use or overuse of it. The human is still a part of the equation. Well, that's one of those things where you look at paintings by different painters. I'm thinking of maybe someone like Boucher or something like that. But there's a painter out of the Gamma background that prettifies, and there's something so false about it that I find it off-putting. I find I can't look at them. Paxton, Gamble, none of those guys, even DeCamp, who has some days he feels like he's got this most fluid mark-making skill, But there's always this sense that the reality, so to speak, is more important than some artsy prettification. And that's the thing that I would worry about. And but that's also in the question of what is it that is specifically valuable. Like the first person talking in this, discussing this with us, is what is that? What is that human touch? And the evidence of the human touch. What is that? And how important is that? So much of what I said we're talking about is what the information we're getting from the other person about life, isn't it? But so yeah, what was that? What was that quote again? I want to grab that if I can for 2 seconds. Yeah, this is Nick, and yeah, I've had this philosophy that so those who create with their hands will be heralded above all other. I chose the road less traveled, but that's in the class of what we're valuing. That's we all value that. Again, if you don't go to museums, you don't, in some sense, know what I'm talking about. You think it's just a picture, and you don't see, you don't know human hands made the violin. If you just hear the music, you don't know the work. You don't know how tired the arm gets. How weary it gets, keeping keeping the fiddle out there and all that, whatever. So, but it's a fascinating question of how much is to be gleaned by seeing the whole, right? You see the half-finished painting, and there's this whole body of data that's so valuable and so intriguing. Why? Because of human struggle, because of the thought process, and how much of that being covered up by prettification, how much of that is, are we losing value? It's a question. We all have choices. The existence of the technology doesn't automatically assume, that's a good point, the use or overuse of it. I'm still not a fan. I still like the idea of, what would I say? In painting, it's is there a place you go to have the painting then all sort of fixed up, tidied up into it, prettified for you? That's what AI. That's what the boy, the guy in the studio is talking about. So what is that then at that point? What kind of product is that? There's a struggle, in my thinking with a person like Kincaid, but he seems to take. He makes these pictures that at first glance are very delightful and pleasing, and then after a while you start feeling a little sort of sick. And you think, what world is that? And some people use the word Disney to talk about making this little happy place. Well, it's not true. It is true that the point of the arts is to elevate the soul. In a sense, to make people feel good. But the human, but the human struggle is the evidence of it somehow or other winds up being a piece of what gives us satisfaction. The person going up and down the floor, hitting these amazing shots, and then missing 4 in a row. Oh, that too. What is that about that though? And then you appreciate again when you get to the end of the game and that person is shooting and they're taking that last shot with no time left on the clock and hitting it. I mean, yeah, you forget all those shots that were missed. And on the other hand, though, when you start watching the whole thing, it gives you perspective on yourself and your ability to perform and being forgiving towards yourself. Is that the kind of stuff that we get to learn from each other? Just a thought that AI, would that wipe it all away? Just make it low? There's a glib way. I call it cheap grace. I think C.S. Lewis used that word, cheap grace. You can get things for nothing, There's no struggle, no suffering, no crying in the woods. I don't think that's what necessarily most people would even want to do with it. I don't mean to say that. But there's something about the evidence of struggle, possibly. Talking about that Bowie thing. Well, Steve, Rusty, he's responding to that. I think that was Steve. Was that you, Steve? Steve TV? Someone named Steve TV. So this is a response to him by Rusty TH. As it turns out, a few years ago, you can simply ask it to produce prompts. I'm sorry. I don't know why it says that, by the way. As it turns out, a few years ago, You can simply ask it to produce prompts that is likely to be seen as unique and interesting, and then have it create and post images based on its own prompts. There's a human there somewhere, sure, but not an artist. Now, that's really a significant question. There's a calling. We have certain people, we all have different callings. Some of us are way more oriented around, the mechanics of the world, and other people about the world of empathy, the world of what would you call it? Even just visual sensation, and that poignancy of certain kinds of that come through our senses, right? And some of us are way more, so should we say, lost in the intellect. No, painters live in both these types as well, or different types. But that's a question whether there's a personality of the painter that doesn't exist if you're just an engineer, or do we all have the personality of a painter, on some level? Or is the personality of a painter one that needs to struggle, needs to labor and labor over things, because it isn't conveying it precisely enough, the emotion, the mood, that thing, that other thing that you're trying to incarnate, you're trying to bring to life in your work. These are in the range of sort of the kinds of questions and things that feed into my brain. But he's saying there's a human there somewhere, sure, but not an artist, not to mention prompt suggestions, which get automatically generated for you nowadays, so the need for thought or intention is minimal. Well, I don't think most of us would. Well, that's an interesting question, because you just start something going and then you start playing with it, it's just a toy, and you get to the end and there was no human intention at all. Well, I take that as being problematical, Rusty, TH. And then the cardboard prophet says true art doesn't use stencils, references of any kind, or tracing paper. Well, whoa. True art does use references of all kinds, doesn't it? We all use models from time to time. For the impressionist, the field in front of you is the model. That's a reference. So, but tracing paper, Degas, Eng, they both used them in different ways to enable their vision to come through, to help them to see something in a slightly different way. But it wasn't something that was offering it something out of its own artificial intelligence. It was something that they were still having to use their eyes for. But it would maybe give them a chance, in the case of Eng, to give him a chance to try it this way, and try it that way. Tracing paper is a very efficient thing. Using those things would make it an artifice, which is what most modern art actually is. Well, that's what Degas said it is, right? He accepts that. It's all made up. We're not painting the sun. We're painting the illusion of a sun, or the fake sun, or whatever, the idea of, but using it with the yolk of an egg, with a color, the equivalent of that. So none of it's real, right? That's one of the flaws in realism thinking. None of it's real, and that's not the point of it. Isn't to be real. It is all, in a sense, false. It's an interpretation. It's a two-dimensional thing in the first place. It's never three-dimensional. It may appear sometimes to be three-dimensional, but there are advantages to, at times, depending on your decorative purpose and needs, to be less three-dimensional, and you have to be skilled in things like that. But just people copying stuff or tracing over images, etc. Well, that's where we know the modern art school has done that. They just gave up drawing at the Beaux-Arts. It used to be that great resource, or a place for people to study. Jerome teaching there. I had a student go over there, Rick, who said that he went to ask them where the drawing room was, and they don't have it anymore, they said. Serious lack of creativity and imagination in modern times. Yeah, I can. Yeah, so what are you going to have to do? I'm going to say again, though, the creativity and imagination, it's the imagination really is required to get to the truth. And truth is the first search for a student. It takes creativity to find better ways of seeing so that you can actually power the truth up even more. And I would encourage you all to really, really imbue yourself with the lessons of what I'd call Impressionism. And not be so sure that there's a better way, right, than the struggle. What I have found simply is that the day you're sitting there looking at three color notes, you've heard me say this, you're looking at three colors and you see them in connection to each other, and all of a sudden something starts happening. You start seeing what's really afoot here is so much bigger than this note and that note and the accuracy of it. All of a sudden something kicks in. Where did that come from? Seeing is then seeing relationally. Why? Because it's the beauty is in the relationships, right? But the truth is in the relationships. So, but it takes a huge amount of imagination, personal imagination to get there. And this motive on making this picture, making this picture, making this picture, as opposed to your own personal development, that's a thing to keep on considering. This isn't, by the way, I must just end here, but this isn't the end of this conversation. I would like to say it's just the beginning. I'm really loving engaging you guys. I don't have any need to be some expert. This engagement, and you're just hearing my response to things you've said, just flying off the cuff as I do. It's my internal sense of things based on a long life in this world, in the world that you're in. So, go deep, go true and the true, the beautiful, and what that even means, and in the nature of our form, the search for our form. You can do all these things. Wonder more about all this stuff. Bring up your further discussions, please do. Anyway, I hope we didn't bore you to death by doing this one more time. Thank you all for those many comments. I think it's the most comments we've had on a single subject since I've begun this. And it may be that we're touching on an approach to making this type of podcast more valuable to you all. I hope so. In the meantime, I do want to get back to pictures more frequently, talking about pictures and some of the how-to related issues and all that sort of stuff again, which I know you guys really value. So I don't mean to get stuck here in just the world of ideas. All right. Hello, kitty cat. Guys, so I hope you all have a great week. Thank you again, my friends, the donors of this week, and your friends and mine, the John J's, the Ben C's, the Angela M's, the Jimmy C's, the Adam C's, and Stephen J. And again, I really wish you well today, Stephen. The very best. So to you all, hope you have a great week. And I am thinking, I'm supposed to say that we are definitely planning on a May or June sort of area visit to London to do a 4-week workshop. So stay tuned for that. I needed to say something. Mr. Producer may have more information now, but I don't think he does. It'll probably be another week or two. Sometime in February, maybe. All right, guys. Thank you for all you've done with all the comments. Thank you for sharing, liking, subscribing, and keep it up. And we'll keep up what we're doing the best we can. Any new subjects and those sorts of things, they're always welcome, and I appreciate it. So I'm doing this really off of what you guys are talking about and thinking about as it relates, of course, the world I'm setting up, which is the world of, if you want to say, my motive initially was to introduce you and clarify the nature of the Boston School. So keep that in mind. But whatever, all these conversations are interesting. So have a great week. All right, see you next time.